Wounded veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan have been living in appalling conditions.
Peeling wallpaper, shower rot,
mice and mold on the walls.
Soldiers face a bureaucratic nightmare and a shortage of trained staff.
The Walter Reed scandal shocked America and spurred major reforms.
The total overhaul of military and veterans health care.
And we're going to fix the problem.
But 6 years later, what's happened to the promises made to wounded soldiers?
They're missing limbs, they're going through so much, and yet we keep piling it on.
If any still hoped that the war in Iraq might be cheap, quick, or painless, the year 2004 proved otherwise. American fatalities passed 1,000, and intense battles broke out in Fallujah and Ramadi. Army Staff Sergeant Dan Shannon, a father of 3, fought in both cities and survived. But on November 13th, he took a direct hit from an AK-47.
Just missed the bridge of my nose and exited over my left ear. And it took all this bone and everything with it. And of course, my left eye.
Medevaced out of Iraq, Shannon arrived at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, America's flagship military hospital. But only 9 days after his injury in combat, the hospital staff discharged Shannon into outpatient status.
They gave me a Xeroxed map of the hospital grounds, and it was not very well photocopied. And here I am sliding down walls, sliding down brick walls outside, staggering across open areas so I can get to another brick wall to hold me up, and have no idea where to go. And mind you, my head is still bandaged at this time frame.
Wearing only a hospital gown and robe, Dan says he roamed Walter Reed's grounds for 2 hours before making it to the small room assigned to his family.
I opened the door and he's standing in the door frame. And the moment he saw me, a sense of relief washed over his face and he just collapsed right at my feet and said, "Oh, thank God I found you." And I was furious.
Dan had found his family, but he was already lost in the system. After an initial series of appointments, he was left on his own until he managed to track down the nurse assigned to oversee his care. That took weeks.
Her comment was, "Where have you been?" And I said, "What do you mean, where have I been? I've never left the hospital grounds. I'm right here. I've gone to all of my appointments." And she goes, "We can see in the computer that you went to all of your appointments, but nobody knows where you are."
Dan Shannon spent more than 2 years in limbo as a Walter Reed outpatient. Then, literally overnight, he became the face of a scandal.
after an explosive Washington Post investigation of the decrepit conditions and stifling bureaucracy and their effect on the troops.
They think the system's against them. They'll recede into their rooms and not physically not come out.
This is what greets wounded soldiers: mold, holes in walls, rats and insect infestation.
I can't believe that there's an American out there who isn't outraged.
When the story broke, the Army quickly saw to it that dilapidated living quarters got a makeover. But on March 5th, when Congress held a field hearing at Walter Reed, Dan Shannon told them the problems ran deeper than mold and mice.
I've seen so many soldiers get so frustrated with the process that they will sign anything presented to them just so they can get on with their lives. The system can't be trusted. And soldiers get less than they deserve from a system seemingly designed to run to cut the costs associated with fighting this war.
Just a day after the commander of Walter Reed lost his post, the same happened to his replacement, and their boss lost his job.
Tonight, the Secretary of the Army got the boot.
That's when Physician-in-General Eric Schoonmaker was chosen to manage sweeping changes, first at Walter Reed and then throughout the Army healthcare system.
That mold and the Byzantine kind of environment in which these soldiers found themselves, almost Kafkaesque, became a metaphor for a moldy system which needed to be revitalized.
The task was more challenging because military medicine had gotten so good. Compared to the war in Vietnam, the odds that American service members would survive combat wounds in Iraq and Afghanistan roughly doubled.
This really stellar achievement in improving survival had, in a sense, a downside for us in the recovery and rehabilitation, and that is that we are now beginning to see soldiers, the likes of which we had not seen in years.
The most tangible reform was the creation of Warrior Transition Units, or WTUs, at Walter Reed and 35 other Army bases. In a novel approach, 3-person teams would provide a web of support for each patient while they healed and prepared to either return to duty or retire from the military.
We needed to look at how all of those cracks into which soldiers were dropping could be closed.
Meanwhile, Dan Shannon and his family had moved over 3 hours away from Walter Reed and were waiting for Dan's retirement paperwork to go through. But then,
I get a phone call on a Sunday night at 8 p.m. that says, Sergeant Shannon needs to report to formation tomorrow morning. And I said, no, he's on terminal leave. They said, well, we lost his paperwork. It's got to be restarted. So he has to report to formation because he's no longer on terminal leave.
If they have lost me after all the exposure that I've had in the media and after my congressional testimony, then how are they taking care of anybody else?
in 2009, the newly elected president, Barack Obama, reaffirmed the Bush administration's commitment.
Just as these wounded warriors are there for one another, this country is going to be there for them.
Obama appointed Noel Cook, a seasoned Pentagon insider, to head what would become known as the Office of Wounded Warrior Care and Transition Policy. Cook was a Vietnam veteran, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past.
I had an old Life magazine from 1970 that was full of heartbreaking stories. Our soldiers were coming home being treated like dirt.
So Cook had the magazine cover made into a poster to publicize his new office.
Then across the bottom it said, "Not this time, not on my watch."
Cook says the posters were not appreciated, and he was ordered to destroy them. Undaunted, Cook and his team began an extensive investigation of military healthcare facilities. In classified reports that were later leaked to the press, they described the medical care in a military hospital as world-class. But it was a different story in warrior transition units, which had now been running for over 2 years.
Some places were better than others, but there were problems of one sort or another at every single WTU that we went to. And these problems were corrected somewhat at Walter Reed, but they're replicated across the whole system.
Cook's team found that some WTU squad leaders were underprepared and undertrained, facing work overloads and compassion fatigue. And all too often, Cook says doctors responded to patients' complex emotional and medical needs with a simple solution.
Dope them up, drug them.
Frankly, I didn't share the perspective that he had and his team had on the care that we were rendering.
But on April 25, 2010, an independent investigation by the New York Times came to conclusions strikingly similar to Cook's, calling WTUs warehouses of despair. The outside validation came too late for Cook. Just a few days earlier, he says the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness asked him to resign.
And he said, "This is going to be a very short meeting." He said, "I just want to tell you that I have no confidence in you, and I'd like your resignation." That was it. There was no run-up to it.
Since leaving the Pentagon, Cook has continued to argue that the WTU system is broken. And Schoonmaker, who retired in 2011, continues to defend it.
We're building the bridges, we're walking on it, we're flying the airplane as we're putting it together. So there were undoubtedly growing pains.
But Schoonmaker says that WTUs are a vast improvement over the old system, and points to Army surveys that report over 80% of patients are satisfied. The Army also cites efforts to prevent over-medication, better trained staff, and improve patient care. But bad news and complaints keep coming.
Every family that I work with has a different story, and every one of them ends, "I'm just a burden and they want me out of here."
Wounded soldiers were met with a toxic environment, and soldiers needing help were told to keep their mouths shut.
One Fort Drum staff member told investigators, quote, "The numbers and types of medications that some of the warriors were taking was a scary situation."
Today, the U.S. has pulled out of Iraq and is withdrawing from Afghanistan. But warrior transition units are still on the front lines in the long-term fight against post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, and major depression.
We've got a wave of problems out there in front of us that are going to be coming at us in the years ahead in numbers that we can't now really anticipate. And it's going to manifest itself in broken soldiers, broken homes, children that are messed up. All this stuff is what we've got waiting for us.
Post-traumatic stress still haunts Dan Shannon and led him to move with his family to a remote cabin in the Colorado wilderness.
Here, I'm not really aware how different I am. I feel that I'm safe here because I don't have the constant inputs of a city environment around me, and I find that I need that. If I have to go to Denver for any reason, I am messed up for about 3 to 5 days after I come home.
Tori Shannon has become a writer and advocate, counseling hundreds of wounded service members and their families.
The Walter Reed scandal shed a lot of light, and there was a lot of attention, and all this momentum and traction was built. And within 2 years, it just fizzled away again. We're right back to where we started, and in some cases, worse than when we started.
Every person who volunteers to join the military has written for the United States government a blank check up to and including their lives in order to protect the freedoms that we have in this country. If the American people can't find value in that, well, I can't believe that. I believe that the American people do find value in that.